What is going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. This is the channel where we sit down and cover different comic book stories from Marvel, DC, and even IDW as well. But today, we are going to jump back over to Marvel Comics, and we are going to continue our coverage over the Ultimate Marvel Universe. And today, we are going to begin our coverage over the new Ultimate Spider-Man, Miles Morales. This is his first time out being the new Spider-Man in the Ultimate Marvel Universe. So if you do like today's comic book video, please hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. But I do hope you enjoy today's video. The story begins with us picking up 11 months ago before the present day, where we pick up with Norman Osborn. This is a very important thing because we see him looking at his different spiders that he has done experiments on. As you know, when it comes to Peter Parker in this universe, one spider escaped and of course bit Peter Parker, except this is a different spider that had escaped from Oscorp Labs. And this is of course going to be the spider that will bite Miles Morales and make him the new Spider-Man in this universe. The big question is, how does this spider end up biting Miles in the first place if Miles never visited Oscorp Labs? Well, it comes with the idea of the fact that after Norman Osborn turned himself into the Green Goblin, we pick up with the character known as the Prowler. Now, in the main Marvel universe, the Prowler was a guy named Hobie Brown, who invented tech to be a thief as a way to make quick money. Now, in the Ultimate Marvel Universe, it is not Hobie Brown. Instead, it's a guy named Aaron Davis, who is also a thief, where we see him breaking into Oscorp that has been abandoned since Norman Osborn was arrested for being the Green Goblin. Well, while he was stealing a bunch of different stuff, he was not paying attention to the spider that escaped crawling into his bag, where of course he leaves with the spider without knowing. Then we finally pick up with Miles Morales, and this is a very important moment of the book because we see him and his parents Rio Morales and Jefferson Davis walking into a building hoping that Miles will be able to get into this boarding school. Now, the only way to get into this boarding school is to have amazing grades, pass their tests, but also have your name called in a lottery. And so with the fact you have the grades and pass the test, you can still be turned away for not having your name called at the lottery. Luckily for Miles, his name is called and he gets into the school. Now, after he gets into the school, he goes over to his uncle's house, which is of course Aaron Davis, the man we just saw break into Oscorp, the man whose bag is holding the spider we saw in the beginning of the book. This section is at first used to tell us that Aaron and his brother, who is Miles' father, do not see eye to eye, meaning that something happened between them. When you have Aaron try to explain how great it is for Miles getting into the school, because Aaron and his brother Jefferson never truly had a chance like Miles. But when Aaron walks away, that is when the spider we saw in the beginning of the book comes in and bites Miles, which leads into Miles passing out from the bite. When Miles wakes up, you have Aaron Davis there to see if Miles is okay, except he tells Miles that he had no choice but to call Miles' father because he passed out of nowhere. When Miles' father gets there, of course, this begins an argument between the two of them, and we learn that Miles' father does not want Miles seeing his Uncle Aaron at all, mainly because Jefferson knows what Aaron does. But with the two of them arguing, it was too much for Miles to watch, so he leaves the apartment completely. Now you have Jefferson leave as well to go find his son because Miles is only like 12 or 13 years old. The problem is that when Jefferson goes outside to find Miles, he can't see him because Miles' powers have activated, which is Miles' camouflage power. Now with Miles seeing that he has powers, of course he freaks out and has no idea what to do and what is going on, so he just runs down the street. But this is the moment where we learn more about his powers. He does have enhanced agility, strength, but the biggest two things we see are powers that Peter Parker never had. The first one is seeing again that he has the ability to camouflage. Now the second power shows itself when it comes to Miles being surrounded by some bullies who want to pick on him for just being there really. Except when he touches one of the guys, his Venom Shock powers activate and temporarily paralyze the kid for a brief moment. But after that, he goes over to his best friend's house and gives us the first appearance of Genki, a character a lot of people actually love when it comes to the Miles Morales comics. Now the reason why Miles came here is because he needed to show someone he has powers now, and the only person he thinks he can trust is his best friend Genki. And so you have Miles show him all of the different abilities he has now, but also tells Genki that he was bitten by a spider. Now Miles is scared to tell Genki. He is afraid to tell anyone else because they might try to tie him into being a mutant. And the reason why, because at this point, being a mutant is illegal. But the section closes with Miles' father coming in and taking Miles home with him so they can talk. And so you have Jefferson sit down and talk to Miles about why he does not want him to see his Uncle Aaron, but also the fact how important it is for him to see Miles succeed in life. For Jefferson and his brother Aaron, they were both thieves when they were younger, except Jefferson realized that he had to get out of the life, especially when he met his wife Rio, who is Miles' mother, and of course when Miles came around. Except for Aaron, he stayed in that life, and Jefferson does not want his son to be part of that life. And so he is trying to establish in Miles to do the right thing. Now, even though this is a very sweet moment for these two characters, we learn that Jefferson hates people who has powers. And this is important really because it makes Miles consider not to tell his father about his new powers. Later on that night, you have Miles get a text from Genki talking about the idea of him not being a mutant, that with the powers Miles showed, it seemed very similar to what a spider can do in different ways. And so you have Genki ask Miles if he can stick to walls, and Genki points out that Spider-Man was bitten by a spider as well. With that being said, you have Miles try to see if he can stick to walls, where of course he can stick to walls, and this leads into Miles knowing that he has spider powers. He is not a mutant. Of course, later that night, you have Genki come over to see Miles' new powers in action. Now by this point, we are right after Ultimatum, I want to say. But getting back to the point of the story, at this moment, you have Genki excited by the fact that Miles has powers. But Miles, of course, is still scared about his powers, still afraid that he might get thrown into a camp or something. But then you have Genki point out that they need to figure out where the spider came from. The only person who might know is Aaron, Miles' uncle, except Miles told his father he would not see Aaron anymore. But at this point, they do not really have a choice here. They need answers right at this moment. Except when they get over to Aaron's place and knock on his door, they get no answer, but the door is unlocked. And so you have the two of them walk into the apartment to see that Aaron is gone. The man packed up everything in a matter of hours and he was gone in the wind. And so the only person who may have an answer on what happened to Miles is now gone. And so now they have no idea where to get answers from. Now on the way home, they see a bunch of fire trucks heading towards something around the corner, where of course for Miles and Genki, they just have to know what is going on. So they rush over to see a building on fire, and there are people who are still trapped inside the building. And so you have Miles decide that he can use his powers to help the people who are trapped in the building. First being a mother who he just throws out of the window, and luckily there is a landing pad on the ground, but he sees someone else still trapped inside, so he goes deeper into the building to save her, and he does. This makes Miles happy to see him use his powers to save the lives of other people, using his powers for a good reason. Except after he does that, you have him hiding in an alley crying, where Genki finds him, and this begins a conversation that Miles tells us that he's too scared to use his powers, that what he did was great and all, but he does not believe he can do that again. So this is the moment where you have Miles decide that he would not use his powers ever again. The idea of him being a hero is too much for him to handle. Then we get to see Miles Morales at his new school, and this is a very important moment because when we see him and Genki get their room, they also get a third roommate, which is Judge. But the point of this is after Miles has spent some time in his new boarding school, we see him having a nightmare where he is afraid that some supervillain would come after him. This dream, we see Electro is the bad guy that kills him. So he wakes up, but when he does wake up at that moment, he, Genki, and Judge are told they are having an emergency drill. The reason why is because Spider-Man has been shot. And we are now at the moment where the death of Spider-Man takes place. Now, of course, you have everyone freaking out because at this point in Ultimate Marvel, the city of New York loves Spider-Man. They don't love every hero, but they loved Spider-Man. But getting back to the main point, you have Miles lead the school so he can see if he can help Spider-Man out with the Sinister Six. Except when Miles gets there, of course, he comes in at the very last second, where Peter Parker dies in the arm of Aunt May. And this was hard to read again because we are just reliving the death of Spider-Man all over again. Now this is Bendis retconning that Miles was there and actually had a conversation with Gwen Stacy after Peter died, where she tells him that his name was Peter Parker and it sticks to Miles Morales for the rest of his life. What I mean by that is you have Miles the next day just thinking about Peter, and the reason why is because Miles felt like he should have been another Spider-Man when he got his powers. Instead, he hid his powers, focused on school, and a few weeks later, Peter Parker died. To him, if he had accepted his powers and used them, he could have helped Peter Parker fight against those villains. And you have Genki tell Miles that he has to realize that maybe he was Spider-Man to pop up to replace Peter to keep the mantle going. The city still needs Spider-Man, and it will be Miles. Miles keeps that thought on his mind, but he wants to know why Peter Parker became Spider-Man. So Miles and Genki goes to the funeral, and you have Miles ask Gwen Stacy why did Peter do it? And you have Gwen Stacy just snapped at Miles and Genki by telling him how Peter's Uncle Ben installed everyone's favorite line, "With great power comes great responsibility." And that line right there is now installed in Miles' mind, where it gives Miles that drive to become the new Spider-Man, to replace Peter Parker and help the world out being the new Spider-Man. So later that day, we see Miles getting a costume from Genki, where of course it is the one we saw in Ultimate Fallout, that Genki wore this outfit for Halloween before, and now giving it to Miles to begin his time as the new Spider-Man. Now, we are going to skip over the next few pages because those pages are just a recap on what happened in Ultimate Fallout number 4. Miles becomes Spider-Man for the first time and fights against a villain named Kangaroo and defeats him. And that is it for this moment. And with that, we can skip to the closing part of chapter 4. Because the next day when Miles goes back out there to be Spider-Man one more time and thinking that this night will be better than the other nights, that is when Miles is confronted by Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, and this is a very important moment for Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Woman is here because she is one of the clones of Peter Parker in this universe. So when she sees someone going around pretending to be like her brother, well, she wants to know who it is. And this is Miles quickly learning that he's not ready for the big leagues just yet, because you have Spider-Woman being able to overpower him multiple times, take off his mask, and then Spider-Woman was able to knock him out. With her doing all of that, she gathers that this is not another Peter Parker clone, that it is just some kid pretending to be a hero. Where of course she takes Miles back to the Triskelion, and where you have Hawkeye, Nick Fury, Iron Man, and her in shock that there is another Spider-Man, where you have Iron Man confirm that his genes have been altered kind of like Jessica Drew and Peter Parker, but just a little bit different, and could be referring to the idea of Miles having different powers. But then you have Nick Fury ask everyone to leave so he can talk to Miles one-on-one. And this is a very important moment for Nick Fury, because to Nick, Peter was like a son to him. So when Peter died, he feels like he failed as a father in a way. So seeing Miles right here in front of him, it is like a redo for Nick, but more of the way of thinking about grounding Miles until he is older and then take him in. Now Nick Fury lets us know that he knows a lot about Miles as well, which just shows off his abilities to be a top spy. He kind of has an idea about how Miles got his powers, but Miles fills in some of the holes of the story of his powers for Nick. Except this is the moment you have Bendis bring in another bad guy for Miles to fight, except someone who would give Miles a challenge. This would be Electro. Now, when we last saw him, he was shot by Aunt May in the Death of Spider-Man story. Well, he is alive, and when he remembers what happened, but also learn where he is at, this makes him use his powers and begin the process of blowing up the place. Now with that happening, you have some of the Ultimates try to stop Electro, where you would think that these guys who are well-trained heroes should beat him easily, since Peter Parker was able to beat him multiple times. But for the sake of the story, we see them getting their butt kicked, and Nick Fury is freaking out since he has no plans on to stop Electro here. But that is when you have Miles go in, sneak behind Electro, and use his Venom Blast to short circuit Electro, and giving Nick Fury the chance to shoot Electro to wrap this up very quickly. But this is an amazing moment for Miles, because now you will have Nick Fury consider letting Miles be a hero. But the story closes on with the next day you have Genki and Miles hanging out, where of course you have Miles telling Genki everything that happened. But while walking around the school, he is confronted by Spider-Woman just being Jessica Drew. This is the moment Miles learns that Nick Fury has given his blessing to Miles to be the new Spider-Man. And by showing that he is giving his blessing, you have Spider-Woman give a gift to Miles from Nick Fury, which is his own Spider-Man outfit. And this is an amazing moment for Miles Morales because he goes out to be the new Spider-Man of the Ultimate Marvel Universe. Now, this is part of the video where I sit down and give my thoughts on about the book. To be honest, I like this book a lot. The reason why is because it gave us Miles Morales. It gave us one of the best Spider-Mans out there today. And also the fact that this was Brian Michael Bendis at his peak. And what I mean by that is because around this time, Brian Michael Bendis was Marvel's best writer, or one of their best writers. And so when he sat down and gave us the origin of Miles Morales, it was done perfectly well. You cannot say it wasn't. Now, there is one thing I did wish that Brian Michael Bendis did, was give Miles his own villain to fight against in his first book. Because truthfully, Electro is a Peter Parker villain. And I'm not saying that Miles should not fight against Peter Parker villains, but Miles should have his own villain in his first book. That's my personal opinion. But again, it did give us a new Spider-Man. And we watch him take down Electro. Besides that, I have nothing else to say. So we are going to end today's video right here. So please hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for more content to come in the near future. Also, any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. I'll see y'all next time. Later.